All right. Welcome to another stream of Last Week in AppSec. I hope you all had a great last week. I think some of you didn't because there were a lot of incidents, especially I think Facebook's teams definitely not had a great last week, or at least a great beginning of this week, I guess. And a lot of teams, in fact, I think Twitch's team is also not having a great week because they just now, just before I went live, I saw news about a breach at Twitch. So this seems to be a pretty big thing that's been happening. That's happened over the last couple of days. It's been nonstop breaches, at least notifications of these breaches. But anyway, I'm happy to be bringing this show again and talk about what happened over the last week, some of the interesting news and things that have been happening over the last week. This week, it's largely breaches, but I do have some productive, constructive security things to talk about as well. It's not all breaches. I'm hoping to talk about that as well. I did have a 3 week hiatus because there were 2 weeks in which I was absolutely snowed in with work, and 1 week I was on vacation. It's very important to take vacation. Don't forget that. So I was on vacation for a week, so I was not able to bring you this. But anyway, I'm happy to be doing this again. So let's get started with a couple of some interesting things in the world of application security from last week. Obviously, unless you've been living under a rock, the big one was the Facebook outage, right? So Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, all of the Facebook cinematic universe, the FCU, suffered a pretty huge outage. And that outage, actually, it's been captured very well by the Cloudflare security blog. In fact, I'm just going to share the screen where they've spoken about the fact, of course, Cloudflare immediately kind of put out this article pretty quickly as the attack was even, I think, as the attack was even happening, that how it happened and things like that. Basically, it looks like, although Facebook actually released a pretty detailed report about what happened, it looks like it was BGP. And BGP is this, it's border gateway protocol. That's how all these large autonomous systems. So Facebook is obviously very large, and it is an autonomous system that has owns a bunch of IP space, just like your ISPs, large ISPs like Verizon and CenturyLink and all of these folks own a bunch of IP space. They're all autonomous systems. Now, these autonomous systems are large enough that they have to that they route through each other or to each other through the protocol called border gateway protocol, which is kind of the kind of tape that holds the internet together, so to speak. So all the routing, really, including basic stuff like DNS, is done once the BGP protocol. There is routing between these border routers. So Facebook seems to have had a pretty serious outage because of a misconfiguration with its border routers. In fact, there was another visualization on Twitter that I saw where it just showed you how all the routes to Facebook completely disappeared, which means that they were completely offline. You were not able to see what they were doing. They were completely their tools themselves didn't work simply because everything they were not nothing could route to them, and they couldn't route to anything else. So a lot of internal tools disappeared. And from what I understood, even some of their data center apps didn't work. And again, remember, it's COVID, so probably they were not as staffed as they were in their data centers, and that's the reason also. I think that exacerbated what happened with the outage. It's very interesting to know, and thing is that it's shocking because again, it's not shocking that Facebook had it. It could happen, I guess, to anybody, but it's just shocking to me that something it would happen at this magnitude with just this one thing. So it seems very fragile. The whole internet seems very fragile, and I was kind of shocked at how things could escalate so quickly with a company like Facebook. I'm sure they have a pretty well-staffed security team. They have a pretty well-staffed network team. I'm sure they're doing a lot of right things in their side, and I really hope they have some safeguards to not let this happen next time around. Again, this could, I guess, happen to a lot of the providers that kind of control the internet today, like Amazon, your Cloudflare. All of these folks could technically have an outage of this magnitude, which could cause the global internet to have a pretty big impact on the global internet. In fact, I think there was an issue with Pakistan and BGP with Pakistan, as a result of which there was a very similar incident with YouTube and things like that. So again, that was obviously the big story. And as we are speaking, I think the Twitch has been breached. I don't know whether it's the breach is actually real or not. We're still waiting for, I think, official comments from the Twitch team, and my heart goes out to them, because it seems like if it's a real breach, it seems like a pretty bad breach, because Twitch not only has their source code been compromised, now they're an Amazon subsidiary. Their source code has been compromised, dating back to the early days of Twitch. In fact, some of their newer initiatives around a Steam competitor has also been leaked, and payment information for some of their top streamers, not just top streamer, I think a bunch of I saw 10,000 entries, in the paste bin link that I came up with. I remember seeing something like that, and that seems to have happened as well. So I really hope they're able to get past this. The other, of course, the other breach that, not the breach really, the vulnerability that something I want to talk about is the Apache zero-day vulnerability that seems to be making the rounds and being actively exploited as we speak. So Apache has 2.4.49 has suffered a is vulnerable to path traversal flaw, where you can essentially fire a payload or path traversal payload, and it's essentially you are able to gain access to sensitive routes like etc password. You're able to gain access to this is a classic path traversal flaw. It's with the CGI build directory, so there's clearly no canonicalization of input on the part of the Apache Web Server. So this seems to be vulnerable in version 2.4.49. And I think they have released a patch, but this is getting pretty actively exploited. Apache obviously is a pretty big influence on the internet. So there's obviously pretty big impact here. In fact, there's a nuclei for those of you who are using this in pentest or are looking for it in your own infrastructure. There is a nuclei template available. So those of you who are into nuclei templates or using nuclei for either OS int or vulnerability discovery itself, there is already a nuclei template available. It seems pretty legit. I myself have not used it. It's local file inclusion. Seems pretty legit. Seems like a decent nuclei template to get started with, to check whether this works or not against your Apache infrastructure. So maybe check it out, maybe see if it's something that you are interested in. So this is definitely looks like a pretty big one. I saw a lot of tweets from Grey Noise where they've seen this being actively exploited quite a bit. Again, a lot of the offensive Twitter Twitter folks have been tweeting about this flaw and the fact that this is a pretty serious flaw in that particular version. So definitely look at it. If you are defending, or if you're responsible for running Apache infrastructure, you know what to do. You probably need to get to patching this like ASAP, because it's pretty horrible. It looks like you can exploit it trivially. You can see it's an unauthenticated exploit. You just have to access CGI bin with a path traversal style flaw, and you are able to gain access to Linux paths like etc password, etc host, what have you. So you have all of that stuff happening, which is obviously not great. This is pretty bad. The other big announcement that I saw from last week, which was very interesting, was the new Amazon AWS Cloud Control API. Now, this may not seem like a big deal to a lot of us, because it's like, okay, this is another API that Amazon launched. But let's talk a little bit about what this is. It's actually really, I think it's going to be a pretty useful API, because basically the idea here is that a lot of us are now on infrastructure as code. A lot of us are using infrastructure as code. We're using Terraform, we're using serverless, we're using Pulumi, we're using what have you, right? We're using a bunch of things. Now, the idea here is that with Cloud Control, it gives you this consistent access to, or it gives you a consistent set of APIs for you to be able to query AWS services itself, right? So how is this different from whatever AWS offered as SDK? Now, this is different because it's largely about querying, CRUD queries to the service itself. So when you're creating a new Lambda function, you can do that with the Cloud Control API. So whatever you could do with Terraform and stuff like that becomes more uniform, becomes more standardized, becomes a little bit more. I think also it gives all of these infrastructure as code providers consistent access to API, and also gives them access to the latest and greatest Amazon products that are released, all the time. So I think that's something that the Cloud Control API does solve. So if you are in the infrastructure as code space, or if you're building infrastructure as code tooling, this is something you should probably definitely look at, because this seems like a very useful set of APIs that Amazon has given you to be able to do this. So it's all CRUDL API. So CRUDL being create, read, update, delete, list, right? So CRUDL. So list is the new thing. It used to be just CRUD, but there's list. So it's basically CRUDL API for all of the Amazon services. So it gives you that sense of consistency and gives you the consistency in accessing the API. So it's nice. It looks like it's pretty useful. I'm going to be checking this out myself. But I think it's largely from a perspective of, if you're building out your own tooling with infrastructure as code, I think this is going to be that much more useful to you. So I think that's something to keep in mind. The last interesting piece this week that I want to talk about is access control. Right now, again, what is so nice? What is so great about access control? Now, one of the things that I have been seeing, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, is that, first of all, access control has become a bigger problem, right? If you look at any of the API, OWASP API top 10, or even if you look at the OWASP Top 10 2021, which recently released, you will see that access control is a pretty big part of it, especially object access control. Especially object access control. And with API, object access control is pretty complicated. It gets a little complicated with API because you need to enforce it across functions, and that gets a little bit more difficult to do. What I am seeing, though, this is not the problems around access control is not particularly new, but what I am saying is that access control, today I'm starting to see a emergence of a new set of products that are addressing access control as code. So one is the one that I've been using the most is one called Casbin, but I recently came across a very interesting project from Google called Project Zanzibar. Now, this is more an access control framework, but let's talk a little bit about this project that I saw tweeted out last week by somebody I follow within the network. So Zanzibar is basically this framework that allows you to set up access control as code. So you can write out access control parameters as syntax, right? You can write it out as as like a language, as code. You can write it out as code, and you are able to start enforcing it across your APIs, across your applications. The idea here is that you don't have to hard code these rules into your application, but essentially use a third-party service like or framework like Zanzibar to be able to process this access control request and see whether this user is authorized to perform this against this object, right? So that's basically what it's trying to do. So SpiceDB is this package that allows you to store and essentially run Zanzibar like expressions, right? So you can essentially write out expressions in Zanzibar or in that particular DSL that Zanzibar provides, and SpiceDB allows you to query it and access it like an API. So that's kind of nice, because this gives you a lot of sorry, I think I just missed that particular page. I was supposed to go to Zanzibar APIs. I just went to the wrong. So you can actually, you can even write your own schema, and you can write your own access control parameters like code, as code, right? So that's the big deal. In fact, there's another project that I am particularly a fan of called Casbin that does very similar things. So basically what you can do is write out your access control as code, and you can query it against this particular policy. And if it matches the policy, then you have a match. If it does not, it does not, right? So SpiceDB seems to be a database and seems like a set of APIs that you can use to be able to do that yourself, to be able to write out your access control as code, store that in some kind of a database, and use an API to be able to check whether to pass user details, object details, access parameter details, and check whether that access actually maps against the policy that's in the database. So this is interesting because there are at least 3 projects that I know of that do this today. And that's good because this is a very important problem that we need to solve. Access control is a pretty huge challenge, especially in the cloud native world, where there are so many different types of systems that are constantly being, that so many different types of access control parameters that one needs to have. I think this sort of technology makes it accessible, forgive the pun, makes it a lot more accessible for us to actually go ahead and implement more effective access control. So I really think that these SpiceDB looks very interesting because, first of all, it's based on a very solid project, which is Zanzibar. So I would definitely recommend looking at Zanzibar and understanding how it is. Although it can get a little frameworky for you. But I think SpiceDB is nice because you can use its schema language to be able to write out your own access control parameters, and it uses Zanzibar as the as the basis for doing that. There's another one called Keto, and of course there's another company called Oso that is trying to solve a similar problem. So definitely take a look. But access control as code, I think, is going to be big in the next couple of years. I think it's going to be a very important thing that we are going to have to consider for all our applications because it's a big problem. We are seeing a lot of access control attacks, and as a result, this is going to be a big thing. Yeah, so that's really the updates for the last week. Now, a few personal points. I did do a very interesting session with OWASP DevSlop on 26th September on security unit tests. So if you're interested in checking that out, please do. I have spoken about some of these concepts very similar to SpiceDB and Zanzibar and stuff like that, more on the lines of defensive security and how you can leverage unit testing to test it and validate it and check against it and so on. So it's definitely interesting. Was an interesting talk. I really loved the energy in OWASP DevSlop as well. And one of the things that I want to talk about is that AppSecEngineer, the training platform that I'm a part of, is offering a 50% off right now on annual plans, which is huge. It's a huge discount. And you get access to our entire library of content and courses. So definitely check that out. It's available at a pretty awesome and sweet price. So definitely check out AppSecEngineer.com and you will see that you can get access to the annual plan at this sweet rate, which is half off, right? Which is awesome. So definitely check this out. This is for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so check it out. And yeah, if you're interested, sign up for it. We're launching a whole bunch of new courses. We're launching stuff in Azure, stuff like that. So check it out as well. With that, I come to the end of my segment on Last Week in AppSec. Thank you very much if you're watching. If you're going to watch on LinkedIn, Twitter later on, leave me some comments. Let's talk about it. Let's see what you want to talk about, what do you want to cover in later editions, and let's see how we can include it. Thank you very much. And that's the end of the broadcast. Bye-bye.